Let's spend some time adding titles to our project. Now, I'm going to break this video up into several pieces. We'll start by working on a title screen, then we'll come back to do some lower thirds and other on-screen at the same time as image type of stuff, and then we'll wrap it up with a credit roll at the end. So to begin, we need to pick a place where we're going to put our title. Now, I want to just do an opening screen for the show, so I'm going to start at the beginning here. Putting titles begins with our effects library, which we have not looked at before. But up here in the top left-hand corner where the media pool button is, right next to that is a button for the effects library. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to toggle my effects library on. Now, I need to have the two-column view here. So if yours doesn't look quite like mine, if all you see is a list of things, but you don't see these categories on the left, it's this button in the top left-hand corner. This is the same button that turned the bin view on and off when we were in the media pool. Then I'm going to select titles, and then you'll see I've got 6 basic titles here I can choose from. Lower thirds that are justified to the left, the middle, or the right. There's a scrolling text. I'll use that when we get around to credit rolls. And then we have a basic text and a slightly more fancy text. And then down here at the bottom, there are many animated titles that you can feel free to play with. Some of these are pretty cheesy, some of these are pretty cool, but they'll all work more or less the same way. So to get started with my title screen, I'm going to start with the basic text here. And I'm going to pretend this is a clip. I'm just going to click and drag it onto my timeline, and I'm going to put it on video layer 2 so it's above the existing video. So here we go. I'm going to click and drag that icon for the text screen and just pull it down here and drop it on the timeline like so. And if you look over here in the program window, you can see the word title has appeared. So I've actually got my title. So here's the clip. I'm going to zoom in on this so we can see it a little bit better. Right, so there's my title text, and here's what it appears like over the video. Not much at the moment, but that's okay. Now I'm going to zoom back out. What I really want to do is I want the title to appear before the edited project. So I'm going to select everything and move everything 10 seconds to the right. That'll give me 10 seconds to have a title screen and a little opening music. So Command A, Control A if you're on a PC, selects everything. I'm just going to click and drag it to the right. 10 seconds or so. Okay. Now I'm going to take my title, deselect everything, and I'm going to slide it to the left so that it's over that empty space, and I'm going to stretch it to fill that entire empty space. Okay. So now my title is over black, whereas before it was over the video. That's because there's nothing underneath it. And even if I were to take this and slide it down onto this first layer, it would work the same way. I'm going to leave it up here on layer 2, and I'll show you why a little bit later. But for now, I'm just going to park it here. Okay, we have a title. How do we change it? We're going to open a window that we haven't played with yet, and that's the inspector window. So up here in the top right-hand corner, we have 3 buttons. You haven't seen these since the very first video for mixer, metadata, and inspector. I'm going to turn on the inspector. Now notice when I did this, a couple of things happened. First, my inspector window did open, right? I've got new information here. But secondly, I've lost one of these video windows. This is because I'm working on a pretty small screen. This 1920 by 1080 screen that I use to make the recordings is very small, but it makes the recordings show up better when you watch them on something small like a phone or a tablet or a laptop even. If you're working with a bigger screen, you'll still have the preview and the program windows like you used to. But for now, we're stuck with just this program window. That's okay. When I open this, my inspector window goes from top to bottom of the screen, right? It goes from the menu bar all the way down to the floor here. It might not look that way on yours. You can change this in the very top right-hand corner of the screen. There's an icon that will let you make that inspector window shorter. Right, so if I click on that icon, it only takes up the upper half of the screen. So this is just a preference. I'm going to go ahead and work with it in the full screen mode here. The thing to be careful about when you're playing with titles is making sure you're working on the right thing. So because my playhead is right here, I can see the title, the word title, over a black screen. But if it's not selected, if I were to select, for example, this clip instead, you'll see that my inspector window changes totally. The inspector window shows you what is selected on the timeline. It does not show you what the playhead is pointed at. So if you have more than one title, it's pretty easy to find yourself making changes to the wrong thing and wondering what's happening. So make sure that my playhead is over the correct title. I single click to make sure that that title is selected. And now I can come over here and start playing. So I'm going to call this Perfect Cappuccino, C-A-P-P-U-C-C-I-N-O. I'm not 100% sure that's how to spell cappuccino, but we're going to work with it. All right. And then rolling down here, all of these things do more or less what you expect them to do. I do not like serif fonts, so I'm going to find something much more boring. My dislike for serif fonts comes from working in television in the days before high definition. How about Arial? That's about as boring a font as we can get. But because this is a title, I will go ahead and make it bold and italic. I'm going to change the color of my font. I think it should be something a little more coffee colored. Now, my color picker, if I go across the top here, I can change to different color pickers. And there's even an eyedropper down here if I wanted to match something on the screen. I'm just going to stick with my box of crayons here and pretend that that looks like coffee. Okay. Size does what you think it does. I can click and drag to change it dynamically, or I could type a value in here if I wanted it to be 150 sizes. I'm not sure if that's picas, points, or pixels. Tracking is space between letters. Maybe I'll spread that out just a little bit. Line spacing is space between lines. I'm going to actually crowd that together a little bit just because it's fun. And you can see there are different font styles I could play with. You can see I can actually change the capitalization. Yeah, why not? You can change the alignment here with these buttons. It looks just like a word processor, right? Don't worry about anchor points at the moment. This is something we might come back to. Now, the X and Y position is where it is on the screen. So if you remember your basic geometry, this is what we're talking about, X coordinates and Y coordinates. This particular screen, this particular video is 720 pixels wide. So my X coordinates run from 0 to 720, 360 is smack dab in the middle of that. And it is 480 pixels tall. So 0 to 480, 240 smack dab in the middle. So right now, the center of my text block is in the center of the screen. If I want to move this, I can click and drag inside one of these windows. So I can move my X from side to side. And I can move it up and down by clicking and dragging in the Y. I can also type values into here. If I wanted to put it back centered, I could go back to 260, for example, and back to 480. If you would rather click and drag, here in the bottom left-hand corner of your program viewer is an icon that we haven't talked about. And right now it's got these four cornered dots on the box. There's a drop down here. There's actually several things I can look at. This first one, though, is called transform. So if I click that, I get a bounding box, and I can click and drag and move my cappuccino around. That way I can even rescale it if I grab the corners. Let me undo. And then to turn that off, I just click this again. I am going to stick with, at the moment, something like that. Okay, maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. X and Y zoom is another way to resize it, and you can see that I can detach one from the other. So if I leave them attached, doing this is really no different than changing the font size. But if I detach them, I can do, oops, something like that. I can stretch it vertically a little bit. And then rotation does what you think it does. So I can sit here and spin this thing a bit, which is what I'm going to do. Okay. Moving on down here, I've got options for my drop shadow, my stroke, and a background. Now these are all at the moment turned on, right? I can turn them off just by clicking that little switch, but you don't see anything because of the way the settings are. So my drop shadow, actually, you know what? Let me come over here. I'm going to slide this over video just so we can see a little bit more clearly. We don't see the drop shadow even though there's a black drop shadow turned on because it has no offset. The X and Y are both set to 0, which means it's in the same place as the title. So if I move it to one side a little bit, and maybe move it up a little bit, you can see there's my drop shadow. And now that I've got it on screen, I can play with it. I can make it more or less blurry around the edges. Opacity is a way to darken it, right, or fade it completely out. And of course, I can change the color. All right, I'm not actually interested in having a drop shadow on this one, so I'm going to turn that off. Stroke is a fancy name for outline, and I work with this a lot. If you have a light-colored text over a light-colored background, for example, it can be kind of hard to read. So maybe here where the text is on top of his arm. So again, it's turned on, and it's a black. It's just the stroke or the outline size is set to 0. So as I move that size up, we see it starts to come into existence there. And then again, with this, I could change the color. So I don't actually need the stroke here. I'm just going to make that 0 size again. Background, as its name implies, actually puts a background just around the text. Now, it's currently turned on, and the color of the background itself as well as the background's outline are both set to black. But I'm not seeing it now because it doesn't have any dimension. The height of this is set to 0. So if I come here and start moving this height fader over, what you'll see is a shape starts to grow. So I can make it tall enough that it goes behind my entire thing. And then the width fader does what you think it would do. It changes how wide this background is. Now that I have it here, I can change the color of the background itself, and the color of the background's outline. And I'm not seeing the outline again because its width is set to 0, but I can run that up a bit. The corner radius lets me change how rounded the edges are. If I run it all the way up, I've got an oval. If I run it all the way down, I've got a perfect square, or perfect rectangle. Center in this case is how well the box aligns with the text. So it looks to my eye like there's more empty space to the right after O than there is to the left before the P and the C. So I'm going to change my X centering to the left a little bit. And you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm just sliding that box back and forth. And opacity, just like before. Okay. Now, again, I'm playing with this over the video, but really my intention is for this to be over the empty space in the black. So I'm going to slide it back over to the left. Okay. So maybe I'm going to round my corners a little bit more. And I'm going to run the opacity down a little bit so it's not quite so garish. Okay, this is really ugly, but you're starting to get the idea of how I can play with these settings. What is a little bit annoying is that I can only do one set of controls, right? I can only have one font, one color, one size. If I want to mix them, what I'm going to have to do is start adding layers. So I'm going to do that next. I want this to say Perfect Cappuccino with Scott, but I want with Scott to have a different look to it. So what I'm going to have to do is add another title. Now my screen's getting a little bit crowded right now. I don't actually have much space to put a third layer of video, which is what I need to do. So I'm going to grab this and slide the audio down so I have a little more space. I could also, if I needed to, remember this button here, I could open it up and I could make my video tracks a little bit shorter if I needed to create even more space. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to grab a text screen and I'm going to drop it on top of my previously existing text screen. And you can see there's the word title. Let me zoom in a little bit and then I'm going to stretch this so that it fits. All right, so now I'm going to grab my title and change it to say with Scott. And I'm going to use the same font that I used before, which was Arial. I'm going to keep the bold italic look. And for the color, I'm going to pick my coffee color again. And then I'm just going to change my X and Y position so that it kind of nests right in here. Okay. And I could continue doing this. I could add layer after layer after layer as I wanted to add color and font or different looks, right? This is not the most fantastic titling tool in the world, but it will do for simple stuff. If you really want to get creative, that's when we start playing with outside stuff. You can draw something in Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator and import it as a graphic. But for simple stuff, this works just fine. Okay, play with this a little bit. Go ahead and make yourself a title screen. In the next video, we're going to take a look at doing video, or at adding titles over the video. So like a lower third to identify Scott, and maybe some titles to identify the ingredients as we play with them.